speaker, Miss Patty. And I believe she needs no introduction.
Just before I begin, I do want to take a brief moment to thank the organizers of LLC for the privilege and honor of having me be this year's keynote speaker. 21, you're old enough to drink. Maybe some of you have already started. I saw you at the bar. I also need to publicly offer up words of gratitude to someone who could not be here this evening, my lovely wife, Dee. She is my constant source of inspiration. She is my steadfast interlocutor, and she is a fearless challenger of my ideas, because sometimes I get grumpy when I get challenged, but she is fearless about it, and she never lets me settle for good when she knows it could be great. The shadows cast by the dimly glowing light bulb shroud us as our nostrils fill with the scent and sense of all who have come before us in search of the promises made by the lure of a dark and gritty bar bathroom. I shove her in the open space between the sink and the bathroom stall, my forearm across her chest, pinning her to a wall tattooed in marker with the names and numbers of the horny and harried. My leather-clad thigh parts her gartered legs, her skirt rising like my heart rate, while my hand begins to weave its way through her hair, gripping and pulling back her head, her breath hot against my face, moaning those words I've been waiting all night to hear. Oh, Daddy. I release her hair, my hand sliding down her belly to take what I came here for, what she came here for. Her cunt, wet and deep, is where all life begins and for me ends. She draws me into her, into me, into us. It is in that carnal act of defiance that the sheer force of our fucking brings to a grinding halt every backwards law and every word of hate ever uttered against us. Because, to quote a line, to borrow a line from one of the songs of my baby dyke youth, it is in her kiss that I taste the revolution.
Damn, Patty.
I have my water bottle.
Water, I need to go to the bathroom.
And now I gotta redirect the blood flow so I could actually say something coherent. It is in her kiss that I taste the revolution. Substitute in for yourself the pronouns that work for you. But for me, this line from Bikini Kill's 1993 song Rebel Girl perfectly summarizes the latent and actual power possessed by those who embrace our place in the liminal spaces of human sexuality. At our core, we leather folk are a bodily people. We are desire incarnate. For those of us who live in leather, we are who we are, in large part because of how we want and need our sex to be. Now, I know there'll be some who'll say to me, but Patty, we aren't just all about sex. And then they will start to wax prosaic using lovely words like tradition and integrity and honor. And yes, those words are important. And they do have a key place in our community. But lots of other communities also claim those words, including those that stand in direct opposition to that which many of us hold as sacred. For those of us who choose to live in the liminal spaces of sex and sexuality, our leather sex becomes its own form of resistance. Even when we are not conscious of it, our very bodies and what we do with them are both the battleground and the weapon in the fight against the capture and imprisonment of all bodies, including our own. I was lucky enough as a baby dyke to be raised by a community of powerful lesbian feminists and fierce and relentless gay AIDS activists. I was schooled by them again and again to remember that the personal is political and that every act, including those which I do privately, has the potential to shift the discourse and the outcome for better as well as for worse. Our leather sex is a form of resistance. But it alone is not enough to win the day in an era and in a climate that seeks to see us and others who live in liminal spaces run asunder. I trust I do not need to spend much time convincing any of you of the dangerous times we live in, and not for the reasons that the spin doctors would have us believe, but for many of the same reasons that led to the birth of the Stonewall riots, the protests after the 1981 bathhouse raids in Toronto, and groups like ACT UP and Queer Nation. Here is my proposal, if you will, that if indeed, as leather folk, our bodily form of resistance will not be enough to keep us safe, then our only chance at surviving and thriving will come by engaging in intersectional practices that capitalize on our interdependence with other communities whose bodies are on the front lines as well. That's a lot of verbiage and some heavy shit. So I'm gonna actually, the rest of my time up here is just gonna be unpacking that one sentence. So don't worry. All right, so let me start just by drilling down into this idea of intersectionality, because we need to understand this before we talk about intersectional practices and what it looks like and why it's important to us in the leather community. This is the part of the talk, by the way, where the sapiosexuals will probably want to go to their bunks. I see the people, and you're laughing, you get it, all right, good. Okay, so this term intersectionality, let me give it some context. It was first coined in 1989 by Kimberly Williams Crenshaw, an American civil rights advocate and leading scholar of critical race theory. She coined this term and worked on developing some of the frameworks that have sprung from it to refer to the study of identities which overlap or intersect in the systems of oppression, discrimination, and domination which impact these identities. All right, so for those of you who got distracted by the word domination, come on back. Wait, I'll give you a second. You can go join the sapiosexuals in the bunk and then come on back. So Crenshaw, who herself is a woman of color, uses the experiences of black women to illustrate the concept. Black women face oppression both as women and people of color at the same time. While they may share some of the same experiences of sexism and misogyny as white women, and some of the same experiences of racism as black men, black women reside at an intersection of two kinds of oppression that has a doubling down effect on the impact. And if you don't believe that multiple forms of oppression result in this doubling down effect, then all you need to do is look at the disproportionately high rate of murder against transgender women of color in North America. At last check, the last few days, there have already been 7 trans women of color murdered in 2017. Trans women of color who sit at the crossroads of misogyny, transphobia, systematic economic disenfranchisement, and racism are among the most at risk for no other reason than living an authentic life. And yet, where is the outrage beyond our candlelight vigils on the Transgender Day of Remembrance when we offer up our thoughts and prayers for those who are already dead, but often beg off of fighting like hell for the living? Every single one of us in this room lives at a unique point that is the coming together of a variety of intersections that reflect race, economic status, ability, sex, gender, sexual orientation, level of
race, economic status,
ability, sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, age, level of kink, and on and on.
Thank you.
Sorry, I get a little carried away, and then my New York comes out.
The interpreters here are awesome, they really are.
Yes. Can we give it up for the interpreter? Yes. So, some of us live at the intersection of many forms of oppression, some of us less so. Those of us who have fewer intersections have more privilege or unearned advantages that have been bestowed on us for no other reason than the convergence of an accident of birth or circumstance and the politics and practices dictated by society. For those of us with privilege, it is our responsibility to acknowledge the power we have, which we have not earned, to listen very deeply, to work on our own defensiveness, and to act in ways that foster equity, not just equality. And I fully and freely admit the last part of that sentence could be its own weekend conference. Right, so there in a very quick nutshell is intersectionality. The recognition that even when we share an identity with another person, they will experience privilege and power differently depending on what other forms of oppression they're also facing. This, my friends, is why groups like Onyx and the Onyx Pearls need to exist. Talk to any of their members and they will share with you experiences of what it's like to be a person of color in the leather community. And what we hear should make all of us feel a sense of shame at times. So let me move on to what does it mean to engage in intersectional practices. To do this, it means that when we walk through the world and when we organize and when we plan, we do so in a way that factors for various experiences of oppression. For example, when we contact the Sharon St. Cyr Fund to ensure that our events have interpreters for the deaf and hard of hearing. Or when we make sure that if we are running men's or women's events, because sometimes we all want our separate spaces, when we do these events, that we make sure that transgender people are included and that this fact is known throughout all the Leatherland. Because as we all know, trans men are real men and trans women are real women, period. And if you're going to advertise and let everyone into your event, then you should be providing proportional amounts of physical and emotional space for everyone along the gender continuum. Everyone with me so far? Okay. So in order to survive, we need to engage in intersectional practices. That's the first half of that big, long sentence. Now on to the second half of my original premise, that in order that when we do these intersectional practices, we have to do so in a way that capitalizes on our interdependence with other communities whose bodies, like ours, are also on the front lines. Here's a simple way to explain what I mean by this. If we're on a ship and there is a hole in the hull in the engine room and I am stationed on the top deck, I cannot stand there and say, that hole in the ship is not my problem because it's not in my section, and then go on about my day. I think we can all recognize that if the ship is in danger of sinking, we are all at risk of drowning no matter where we are. Though admittedly, some of us will probably drown sooner than others. Our ability to be the leather folk of our fantasies is absolutely and undeniably bound to the safety and well-being of other bodies in other communities who sit at some of the same and some different intersections as us. It's not just nice that we put our efforts behind other non-leather organizations, but I would contend that it's essential to our survival. To illustrate this, I want to briefly, and I mean very briefly, talk about why the leather community needs Planned Parenthood, Rad Remedy, and Black Lives Matter. This being said, I don't want to imply that these are the only organizations or communities with whom we should align ourselves. We could talk about any number of communities. The Water Protectors at Standing Rock, My Charity of Choice, Rainbow Railroad, any of the organizations working against anti-Semitism, anti-Islamophobia. But because I don't want us to be here until the start of IMsL and IMsBubba weekend at the end of April, I'm just going to talk about these three. You're welcome. A second disclaimer. In this next section, I'm going to talk in a little bit of an us and them kind of way in regard to women, transgender, and Black people. But it needs to be noted, this is very artificial. This is very artificial because there is no real us and them. Because women are leather people, and transgender people are leather people, and people of color are leather people. So please know I'm acutely aware that to drive home some points, I'm creating a dichotomy that doesn't necessarily reflect all realities. Okay, so don't flame me later on the internet, because I know this. Okay, I'm doing a thing. So let me begin with the question. What do these three organizations have in common with the leather community in the here and now? And the answer is simple. Bodies that are under assault. Physically, emotionally, legislatively, and economically. If you want to be able to engage freely in leather sex, then you need to fight for a woman's right to choose. If women can't take basic control of their own health care, we as leather people stand no chance in being able to do what we want to do with our bodies. Planned Parenthood has been and continues to be at the vanguard of ensuring the right of people of all gender identities to make informed choices about their bodies. If you, and I'm talking a little bit now to my gay brothers, but all of us, if you want to advocate for things like wider accessibility to this amazing, amazing medication called PrEP and HIV testing and treatment, then I need you to be at the ready to stand shoulder to shoulder with me and my female body and Planned Parenthood, because misogyny is the root of homophobia. If the powers that be have managed to put more regulations on my uterus than a handgun, they won't think twice about cutting all the things connected to sex and sexual choice. From what I have read in the last few days, the efforts in Washington around the ACA, it's already on the verge of happening in terms of, people's soon inability to access PrEP in an affordable way. It's coming. For many of the same reasons, we leather folk need Rad Remedy, an organization that is dedicated to connecting trans, gender nonconforming, intersex, and queer folks to accurate, safe, respectful, and comprehensive care. If transgender people cannot get access to the appropriate means to take care of their bodies and their minds, then we are all at risk as kinky people. The right to be treated by informed and sensitive practitioners is as salient to leather and kinky people as it is to members of the transgender community. That is in part why there is a continuing education track here for mental health care professionals, and why we have the Kink Aware Professionals Directory. Trans rights are human rights, and more than ever, we need groups to specifically fight for those rights. We cannot afford to support organizations who lobby for changes to the system, but then drop the T in LGBT because they think it will make bills or grants or whatever more appealing. To paraphrase Kimberly Crenshaw again, we cannot afford to engage in some kind of trickle-down approach to social justice in which we stand only with those identities who mistakenly appear to be most politically expeditious. Trickle-down didn't work as an economic theory, and it certainly won't work across issues of human rights. Call them like I see them. And what more of an essential right is there than the right to go about your daily life and have a reasonable expectation you will make it to the end of the day alive? For many people of color, particularly Black people, making it to the end of the day is not always a given in the same way it is for white people. Black bodies are under assault, including the bodies of Black women whose deaths because of sexism often go or underreported by the media, hence the impetus behind the Say Her Name campaign. If in a sentence about the killing of Black people at the hands of a militarized police force, you feel the need to utter anywhere the phrases, "yes, but," "all lives matter," or "blue lives matter," you are de facto contributing to the problem of racism and white privilege. It is truly that simple. Declaring Black Lives Matter does not mean that no other lives matter. It means you are willing to use your voice to highlight an ongoing crisis. Similarly, when people declared that Black Lives Toronto, this past Pride Parade, hijacked it, when Black Lives Matter Toronto brought it to a halt, making a series of demands challenging the inherent racism of the sanitized and corporatized version of Pride we now have, I can't help but think, wow, how we have such short memories. Or maybe it's just our racism showing. It was not that long ago when protesters shut down major streets and intersections in Toronto after the 1981 bathhouse raids. And when ACT UP protesters disrupted John Cardinal O'Connor saying Mass in St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City. If you go and read the piece in the New York Times on the St. Pat's action, you'll see how irate people were at ACT UP's irreverence towards such a sacred institution. With that many gay lives on the line, people did what they needed to do to get the job done. And my personal opinion is that Black Lives Matter is doing exactly what they need to do to get the job done. Because the lives of Black people are just as much on the line on a daily basis as ours were in the early days of the AIDS crisis, and will be again soon, all of us, if this current reign of tyranny goes unchecked. If you, like me, remember the days when every week brought a fresh batch of obituaries and raids on the places where we were most sexually free, then you as a leather person need and must stand with Black Lives Matter. Yes, these are dangerous days, but also not ones without hope. We're all here together this weekend at this conference. We have all spent money and are giving up time at home because we believe in one way or another that it is through organizing within the leather community that we and others will be that much more free. And for each of us leather folk who are at the ready to resist in only the ways we can, there are many more in other communities who are at the ready to resist in only the ways they can. Leather sex is its own form of resistance, whose moans and cries and energy must take its place in the wider movement. Make no mistake, this is a call to action, because it is in our kiss that we all taste the revolution. Thank you. Merci. Et bonsoir. Get out there and find some dirty bathrooms. It exists.